Green Eyes. Jackson was not sure what she saw in him, but he knew one thing for sure. He had hit the jackpot when he met Sue Ellen in their sophomore year at Fairvale High. Overnight, he had become the envy of all his friends who looked on him now with a mixture of pride and jealousy, not knowing if they should stone him or make him their god. Sue was more than the most beautiful girl in school. She was special. There had been other girls, lots of other girls, who attracted Jackson's attention at one time or another, many of whom were perhaps traditionally sexier than Sue. Gina, whom he'd had the pleasure of dating briefly as a freshman, had much better legs. Sandra had lips for days, with a tongue that seemed to roll out like a red carpet for just about any guy who'd give her the time of day. Roxy had a chest that left her sweaters stretched out at night. But as far as Jackson Kreitzer was concerned, none of them, not a single one, held a candle to his Sue Ellen. Sue was classically beautiful, an angular jawline framing her delicate face. Deep green eyes and a Colgate smile was set against a backdrop of platinum blonde hair which cascaded down the small of her back. The combination made her look like she could almost be a movie star, one of those old-time Hollywood actresses. She was as blissfully unaware of her beauty as she was the grace with which she moved, making her all the more attractive. She was not a goody two-shoes, nor was she one of those hellion teens. She was never too clingy with Jackson, though never too far or absent in her affections. She was neither confident about herself nor insecure. She was just Sue, and she was perfect. You could say it was the land itself that had been responsible for bringing Jackson and Sue together. Sue came from an upper-class family. Jackson was a farm boy. The farm on which Jackson had been born and raised boasted 14 acres of land, the final acre of which had just barely made the mark for entering the town's better of two school districts. Since the day they met, Jackson and Sue had become inseparable, which seemed strange to most of their classmates, who immediately deemed it a mismatch that would not last out the summer. But it had lasted out the summer. It had lasted out 2 summers, in fact, and by the time their senior year had rolled around, Jackson and Sue were growing increasingly concerned about their future together and how they would manage to stay close after graduation. Sue had a full scholarship to Florida State. Jackson was a farm boy, and his father needed help at least a couple years more. Somehow Jackson knew in his heart that a couple years would most assuredly turn into a few, and that a few would likely turn into a lifetime. He could not bear the thought of losing Sue, and so he was thankful that she had begun applying to local community colleges. Thankful, yes, but a steady growing guilt nagged him daily. He knew if she stayed for him, he would be holding her back. Sue had a bright future ahead of her. She was going places. Why she would lower herself to be with a ranch hand like him was just beyond Jackson. Maybe she wanted to get back at her rich folks, or maybe she'd just been crazy for his kisses. He only knew he was lucky to have her. What Jackson did not know is that while both of these things were true, she had wanted to rebel against her parents' lifestyle, and she was quite crazy for his kisses. What was even truer was that Sue Ellen loved Jackson Kreitzer. So much so that she had whiled away many hours just practicing her signature for when she would one day take his name as her own. She would mindlessly tap her pencil against her notebook in class, daydreaming about what their children might be like, and how Jackson would look with a child in his arms. If there was a central point of passion, one particular trait or quality which Sue could identify in Jackson that made her love him so. She thought it would have to be the dirt under his fingernails. She had confided this bit of information to a friend of hers who laughed when Sue had told her. "Ew," her four-eyed friend Elsa had screamed. "The dirt under his fingernails? Gross." Sue smiled, understanding her reaction. It was, after all, an unconventional thing to love about a person. But no matter how much Jackson cleaned up, and he cleaned up so handsomely for their dates together, he could never seem to get all of the dirt out from beneath those nails. It defined him, in a way, she thought. He was from the other side of the tracks. He was a country boy, heart, body, and soul. Those fingers, which had touched her so gently and also sometimes so very roughly, knew the value of hard work. He was not afraid to get his hands dirty, or of the pain that came from a long day's labor. He would always have that dirt under his nails. Sue knew as well as Jackson he was never getting off that farm. One day, the land, the crops, and all its inhabitants would be his. It was a thought that frightened her, but also excited her, to think of living on that farm with him someday. She loved escaping her privileged life to sneak into his barn at nights. She loved how the sweet smell of the hay remained with her, even after she returned home to lie alone in her bed, wishing he was there. She loved the permanent tan of his skin, and how he had made love to her. Others had told her the first time would be dreadful, that she should expect all kinds of pain. It hadn't been like that, though. Not at all. The only pain had come just moments before they were wrapped in each other's embrace. Jackson had picked her up and carried her to the pile of hay in the corner of the barn. As he gently lay her down, she looked up at him and asked, "What is it you love about me most, Jackson?" "That's easy," he smiled. "Don't laugh at me, though." "I won't laugh," she said, giving the Scout's honor with her fingers before crossing them behind her back. "Your eyes," he smiled. "My eyes?" she asked, stifling a nervous giggle. "Your beautiful green eyes," he said, gazing into them. Sue thought it must be the deepest gaze the world had ever known, and with similar depth, he kissed her then. It was a kiss that told her this was a boy who would do anything for her. A boy who was quickly becoming a man. A man who would be worthy of her love. A love that would be worthy of her life. Jackson began to unbuckle his belt, and Sue let out a huge scream. He threw his arms in the air. "What'd I do?" he shouted. "I didn't mean to." Sue started to laugh hysterically. "No, silly," she said, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Whether she was crying from the hilarity of the situation or from the overwhelming emotion in her heart, she was not sure. "Something just bit me." "Damn mosquitoes," Jackson said, and started searching the air angrily, like a soldier who was ready to do battle against the big bad gnat. "No, not a mosquito," she sighed. Sue lifted her skirt and rolled onto her side so that Jackson could see. There, on the back of her left thigh, was a pink bite mark surrounded by raised skin, far larger than that of any bug. "What is it?" she asked. "Looks like snake bite," he said. "Snake!" she screamed, jumping up from the hay. As she bounced up, Jackson pointed to the corner. Sure enough, there was the culprit. It slithered in a long, squiggly line, quickly across the ground. Jackson went chasing after it, swiping at the dirt as the S-shape went slinking this way and that, making a fast break for the open crack beneath the barn doors. It was gone. "We should get you to a doctor," Jackson said worriedly. "Oh no, Jackson," Sue began to cry. Tonight was supposed to be special. I swear it barely hurts. Look, there isn't even any blood, really. I'll be fine." "Well, you at least need a doctor to nurse the wound, even if it isn't that bad," Jackson said, with a sense of calm care that made Sue love him all the more. He was more concerned with her well-being than his own pleasure, and that, she thought, was quite a feat for an 18-year-old boy. It showed what kind of man he was becoming. "Listen, Sue," he continued, "it's not likely poisonous, not in these parts, probably just a garden snake or something, but you want to have it looked at, just to be sure." "I promise I'll go to the school nurse in the morning, and I'll have it looked at," she sighed. "I can't very well go to a hospital without my parents being called, now can I? And if they called my parents, they'd know I was here." "We need to make sure it's not poisonous, though," Jackson insisted. "Well, if I start foaming at the mouth, then I guess we'll know it's poisonous," Sue smiled, grabbing his hand and leading him back to the bundles of hay. "Aren't you the least bit scared?" Jackson laughed with a shocked expression. "Most girls would run out of here screaming their dang head off if they saw what you just saw, much less got bit." "Well, I'm not most girls," Sue smiled up at him, this time laying herself down in the stacks. "And besides, I had ought to get used to this sort of thing, hadn't I? I mean, after all, I might just live here one day." The words had taken his breath away. He felt as if he couldn't move, and looked as if he may very well cry. "Kiss me," she said. He grabbed her then, with dirty hands, and did just that.